those who join them.
God has given America to the free.
America's religious heritage stretches back to its first days.
It was founded by people who were fleeing persecution for their unusual or unorthodox or nonconformist views.
People came here to flee the oppressive kind of regimes in Europe, and they wanted to come here so that they could freely worship.
Freedom of worship became enshrined in America's Constitution. New religions were founded, some with extreme beliefs.
Culturally, the word cult typically means a religious group that is seen as very strange, possibly dangerous, secret, unknown.
Most dangerous of all are those cults led by Doomsday prophets. Charles Manson, David Koresh, Jim Jones. Time and time again, America has watched messianic leaders manipulate, abuse, and kill.
That's a dynamic that happens over and over again in our history.
There I am.
Whenever people see that kind of strong leader, I think they get afraid.
In the late 1980s, a woman who claims to be a prophet tells her followers to build something extraordinary in a Montana valley.
They first came here in 1981, bought land here. By 1989 and 90, they were in full preparation mode for apocalypse.
It's an underground city, destined to house over 700 people for 7 years. And it's being constructed on the orders of one woman.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Elizabeth Prophet.
heart flames of the great light of freedom.
She was the leader of a little-known religious group called Church Universal and Triumphant. For decades, the story of the shelters and why they were created has been shrouded in secrecy. But a former church insider has broken ranks to reveal all. His name is Sean Prophet. He's Elizabeth's son.
I'm going back there to tell a story, and really, I think it's a story that needs to be told.
Now an ex-church member, Sean's returning to Montana to make a self-funded documentary about his time in the church. But he's being monitored.
They're letting us know that they're watching, so that we don't try to sneak around and get in there.
Just beyond this gate is Royal Teton Ranch. Church Universal and Triumphant bought the land in 1981 and still operates there today. In recent years, they have had little contact with the media, leading some to wonder if they have something to hide.
I don't like to use the word cult because I think that it automatically is prejudicial, but I do have strong feelings about, the negative effects of that group.
Sean's father, Mark Prophet, began the religion in the 1950s. When he died, his wife, Elizabeth Clare Prophet, took over leadership of the church. Key to the belief system is the existence of so-called ascended masters, historical figures who have achieved divine status.
These ascended masters were, I guess, the best and the brightest, supposedly, of humanity who had perfected themselves and ascended.
Jesus Christ was one of the ascended masters. So was an 18th century count known as Saint Germain. By chanting and meditation, Elizabeth Prophet claimed to gain exclusive access to the ascended master's wisdom.
I, Saint Germain, will not withhold my blessing from this people and this land.
She was essentially becoming, the spokesperson for these masters, who of course no one else could see.
Elizabeth Prophet drew followers from all corners of the globe who hung on her every word. But one message, caught here on tape, would test their devotion to the limit.
And Saint Germain himself has told us that we have every reason to expect and to be prepared for a Soviet first strike against the United States of America.
October 2nd of 1987, she gave a dictation that within 24 months, you have to have protection against nuclear attack. We believed that there was going to be global destruction via nuclear war.
Apocalypticism, doomsday predictions are a feature of virtually every religious tradition.
According to Dr. Lauren Dawson, even mainstream religions hold apocalyptic beliefs.
Christianity, ironically in some respects, is the most apocalyptic of all religions, with the Book of Revelation, of course, which the proper term for it is the apocalypse.
But America's history has taught us to beware of leaders who prophesize an imminent doomsday. A little over a decade before Elizabeth Prophet, another self-styled Messiah was making apocalyptic predictions. His name was Jim Jones.
Jim Jones always was predicting the end of the world. Any day, the world was going to be blown up.
Perhaps more than any man alive, Vernon Gosney knows how destructive cult leaders can be. He's one of the only survivors of one of the worst massacres in American history.
What first attracted me to Jim Jones and the People's Temple was his vision for the future, for his vision for a community.
It's the 1970s in San Francisco, a time when many are searching for new direction. Vernon and thousands of others think the preacher Jim Jones can show them the way.
A very charismatic, very powerful speaker.
If you teach you that what you see is what you get, if you don't deny it, you will perish.
Jones promises the faithful that together they will create a new world, free of the racism, sexism, and homophobia that he says plague America.
The people in the temple treated him like a very revered leader, like a prophet. It was very much an immersion type of experience.
It would have been hard not to have been impressed by him.
Jones's charisma helps him to whip his congregation into a state known as collective effervescence.
It's just a word to describe that intense psychological dynamic that gets going in a crowd when they're worked up and they're excited. He generated that week after week after week in his sermons. So that has a powerful impact on people.
Jones is so captivating that even prominent politicians, like the mayor of San Francisco, are drawn to him. But Jones is not the pillar of virtue he pretends to be.
He created phony healings in order to amplify people's perception that he had divine powers.
Worse than that, in 1977, a San Francisco newspaper publishes details of the physical abuse his followers are subjected to.
Jim Jones was tipped off it was going to come out and what its contents were. And within a matter of weeks, he told everyone to pack up and move.
It was only as authorities were coming after Jim Jones that he decided to move his group down to Guyana.
Jones leads hundreds of his followers on an exodus to the socialist South American country of Guyana. They carve a settlement out of remote jungle and call it Jonestown.
I thought I was going to a promised land.
Vernon Gosney and his 4-year-old son Mark are among the settlers.
We were going there to build a city in the middle of the jungle that was going to be a utopia.
But this paradise has a dark side.
We were met with people with guns.
Jonestown, Guyana had been billed as a utopia by its founder, Jim Jones. But for Vernon Gosney and his son Mark, it's turning into a nightmare.
I didn't know that I was going to basically a concentration camp where I had no freedom of movement, I had no freedom of speech, that there was going to be loudspeakers going on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that I was going to be subject to such severe regimentation. And neither did anyone else that went there.
Jim Jones employs armed guards. He says they're to defend Jonestown against threats from outside.
If you really want to bring a group of people together in a very tight-knit, cohesive group, you need to create evil outside influences.
He was always predicting that. It was going to be the CIA, it was going to be the government, they were going to come and get us.
Almost every cult leader tells its followers, there are dark forces out to get me, so I need to have security guards. We need to have barbed wire fences, not to keep you in, to keep the bad people from coming in.
By isolating his followers in the jungle and inciting paranoia amongst them, Jones makes their devotion grow stronger.
It served to cement us together. We were in a desperate situation. And in desperate situations, you have to steel yourself. You have to do what you need to do.
Jones's next task is to quell any dissenting voices. He devises tests of his followers' devotion, known as White Nights.
White Nights were basically a dress rehearsal for revolutionary suicide. And revolutionary suicide was that we were going to lay down our lives for the cause when there was no other escape whatsoever.
He was having people line up and drink and then saying it was a test of faith.
The cups contain ordinary fruit drink, but Jones tells his followers that one day they might be filled with poison.
It was a weeding out mechanism to see who's really committed, to see if people would really do this. And he also knew that by rehearsing something, you start a process of anticipatory socialization to it.
Meanwhile, Jim Jones is using LSD and other drugs. His behavior is becoming irrational, his paranoia more extreme.
I think it's fair to say that he really had reached a clinical state of paranoia, so that he was on the intercom system all day, all night, saying things, encouraging people, denouncing people. That's when it started to go south.
California Congressman Leo Ryan has heard about the strange rituals at Jonestown. He travels to Guyana with journalists to investigate.
It was at the height of Jim Jones's paranoia that Congressman Ryan arrived.
Vernon Gosney thinks the visit of the congressman might offer a chance for him to escape Jonestown. He writes a short note that will set off a dramatic chain reaction.
I wrote on a sheet of paper, help us get out of Jonestown, and decided to slip that note to the congressman.
The following day, Jim Jones is confronted with the note.
Well, that's who we're talking about. He wants to leave his son here. If Jonestown's such a bad place, why does he want to leave his son here?
Vernon plans to leave Jonestown and return later for his son. Others decide to follow him.
There was a snowball effect. Once the crack started to open, more and more people wanted to leave.
Congressman Ryan offers Vernon and other defectors safe passage back to America. But Jones won't let this challenge to his authority go unpunished.
My feeling that morning was a foreboding. There was a feeling that I was never going to get out of there. We were taxiing down the runway, getting ready to take off, when the tractor trailer came.
The members leaped out of the back of the truck with their rifles and just opened fire.
The NBC cameraman who filmed this footage is shot dead by Jim Jones' henchmen.
The congressman died, numerous other people died, and many people were injured.
Vernon is shot by a fellow passenger who had been posing as a defector.
I was shot 3 times. I got out of the plane, and when I got to the end of the airstrip, that's when I collapsed.
As Vernon lies bleeding in the jungle near Kaituma Airfield, Jones is preparing for another white night. But this time, the fruit drink will be laced with cyanide.
We've been so betrayed. We have been so terribly betrayed. But we tried, and this only worked one day. It was worthwhile.
In a rarely broadcast audio tape from November 18th, Jim Jones is heard urging his followers to lay down their lives.
So, my opinion is that we be kind to children and be kind to seniors and take the portion like they used to take in ancient Greece and step over quietly, because we are not committing suicide. It's a revolutionary act.
They were being told it's not going to hurt, it's not going to hurt. But as the poison was taking effect, people were screaming in agony. Other people lining up were listening to that. And at a certain point, people were like, I don't want to do this. You have to do this. If you don't, we'll shoot you.
Six miles away, locals find Vernon Gosney critically wounded on the edge of the airstrip. He's evacuated to Puerto Rico.
When I got out of intensive care, I was in a hospital room, and a psychiatrist came into my room and opened up a newspaper and showed me the headlines and the picture with everyone dead. He asked me what my son was wearing so they could help identify the body. And I told him what he was wearing, and at that point, I was pretty much had like a mental breakdown.
The pictures beamed onto America's television screens almost defy belief. Over 900 people lie dead, including almost 300 children.
A lot of people say 913 people committed suicide. In my opinion, it was murder.
My son was murdered in Jonestown on November 18th with the rest of the children there.
To this day, Vernon finds it hard to explain why he left his son Mark at Jonestown.
I just feel like that I was so indoctrinated and so programmed that I couldn't even think hardly at all for myself. I don't know what else to say. I don't know if I've ever been able to get my son out. I don't know.
Jim Jones also dies at Jonestown. The mass suicide is seen by some as a final demonstration of his power.
He was watching the end of his grand social utopian experiment. He either had to let the whole thing fail, or he had to go out in a blaze of glory.
For Jim Jones, the massacre is also a way to create a lasting legacy.
We are still talking about Jim Jones and about his beliefs and ideas long after otherwise we probably would have been.
Jonestown remains the largest loss of American civilian life in a non-natural disaster until September 11th, 2001.
I must have had dreams for 10 or 15 years about escaping again. And I struggled with alcoholism. I struggled with the grief and the loss and the guilt of my son's death. And so it was a very, very long recovery.
Now a police officer in Hawaii, Vernon Gosney never wants the lessons of Jonestown to be forgotten.
I have to share my experiences, so hopefully that people will be more educated. The dynamics of cults still exists past Jonestown. It didn't end on November 18th, 1978. It continues on.
In the late 1980s, the specter of Jim Jones is lurking around a new religious movement in Montana called Church Universal and Triumphant.
Once Jonestown happened, everybody was afraid that their kids were going to get caught up in this organization that was going to possibly result even in their death.
10 years after Jonestown, Elizabeth Prophet has her closest followers isolated in a remote valley outside Gardner, Montana.
Her word was law. She was the voice of God, and no one questioned her.
We come in the moment and the hour of the pinnacle.
Elizabeth Clare Prophet, leader of Church Universal and Triumphant, has predicted an imminent nuclear strike. The Doomsday date is set for October 2nd, 1989.
Leaders often revert to becoming more specific in setting dates because it's a way of galvanizing commitment.
But news of the predicted apocalypse causes alarm among nearby residents.
They were labeled as a cult, accused of brainwashing people. Animosities kept growing as more and more church people came here.
This town is all about fly fishing, rafting, and tourism, and the church was seen as a threat to that because, you know, we were moving 750 people into this area. So, needless to say, relations between the church and the townspeople were kind of frosty.
And if locals knew exactly what was going on at nearby Royal Teton Ranch, they'd be even more concerned.
We mounted this furious effort over the course of about 18 months to build these huge shelters.
As this rarely broadcast footage shows, believers started to construct an underground city to ride out the nuclear winter. Overseeing it all was Sean Prophet.
There were 6 living pods, each one housing 126 people. They had kitchens, they had showers, they had infirmaries, they had laundry facilities, they had everything that you would need. The largest shelter, it was twin arches that were each 300 feet long, 40 feet wide, 20 feet high. You could drive a semi-truck inside that thing.
Many followers donate their savings and work for free.
We probably spent in the neighborhood of $25 million on the shelter complex. That figure doesn't include 2 years of unpaid labor for around 200 people, men and women.
And as the Doomsday looms closer, preparations become more extreme.
We felt that we had every right to defend ourselves. And so a lot of people in the church began to buy high-powered weapons.
These 50 caliber rifles, according to the manufacturer, are capable of blowing a hole through a car from a mile away.
Of course, it made a lot of people very worried about what was going on at the ranch.
Erin Prophet is Elizabeth Prophet's daughter. She was due to follow in her mother's footsteps.
Well, she never called me her successor, but she was training me to learn how to do what she did, which was take messages from the ascended masters and learn how to give dictations the way she did. In her vision of the Four Horsemen, she said that there would be economic collapse followed by war, which would be followed by disease and famine, starvation and death.
While Elizabeth Prophet warns of an apocalypse, her critics are warning that this combination of religious fervor, weapons, and isolation might create another Jonestown massacre.
People did have freedom to use the telephone, to correspond, to communicate. They watched the news. So it was not as isolated as Jonestown, but you did have some similarity in the power structure, that you had one leader that was basically making all the decisions and there were no checks and balances.
Absolute power is dangerous in any leadership situation. But when that power is cloaked in divine conviction, it can drive followers to unfathomable acts. Jonestown proved that. And in 1997, America would be reminded again.
Your only chance to evacuate is to leave with us.
The Doomsday Prophet this time is Marshall Applewhite. The cult he leads is called Heaven's Gate.
March 26, 1997. I was just going through my normal routine of loading up my patrol car.
But for Sheriff's Deputy Bruck, this afternoon shift will be anything but routine.
I talked to the dispatcher, and at that time, an anonymous person had reported that a religious group had committed suicide and gave me an address out in Rancho Santa Fe.
Deputy Brunk drives out to investigate and finds a mansion with the drapes drawn.
When I opened up that door, the smell that came out of the house, right away I knew that someone was dead inside the house.
But no one will believe how many bodies are in this mansion, or what else the police will discover.
Some of the men had been castrated.
Marshall Applewhite. In the 1970s, this former music teacher founds a religion called Heaven's Gate.
Heaven's Gate was a UFO cult.
The basic idea was that they were aliens from another dimension who had come to Earth a long, long time ago, and their people took on human forms to do research.
Applewhite tells his followers they are members of an alien race called the Elohim, and that soon they'll be called on to shed their human forms and return to space.
We incarnated into these human bodies, and now we're leaving these human bodies behind.
Like other self-styled prophets, Applewhite claims he has received a doomsday prophecy, in this case, from an alien race.
They had sent the message to Applewhite that they were going to wrap things up and that they were basically going to destroy the planet.
In 1997, Applewhite receives a sign that the doomsday has come. A comet called Hale-Bopp, visible for the first time in 4,000 years. Applewhite believes that hidden in its tail is a UFO that has come to rescue him and his followers.
The rumor mill amongst sort of esoteric groups was that there was something in the tail of the Hale-Bopp comet. And Heaven's Gate seemed to seize upon this as evidence that the Elohim were coming in a special ship hidden by the tail of the comet.
But to catch the rescue UFO, they have to exit their human bodies.
They sat down and did testimonials, videotape testimonials. So every single member sat down and gave a final little 5-minute talk to their relatives, and universally happy and overjoyed.
I have chosen to do. It's not something that somebody brainwashed me into or convinced me of.
We're not forced into this in any way. It's, our own choosing to do it, and I'm really happy that I made this choice.
They're about to leave, and they're excited about it.
In late March 1997, when the comet is at its brightest, sedatives are mixed with applesauce. Over 3 separate days, the 39 cult members assist each other to commit suicide.
They worked in shifts to commit the suicide. It wasn't all at one time.
It was careful, it was calm, it was calculated.
They took the phenobarbital, and they placed bags over their head and suffocated themselves.
On March 26, 1997, police are called to a mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, California.
As we got into the foyer area, that's when we started noticing bodies. One was on a mattress, and then there was one on top of a folding table.
The house contains 39 bodies, including that of the group's leader, Marshall Applewhite.
They all seem to be dressed alike. black running gear attire, like a pantsuit and jacket, and they had a patch on their arm that said Heaven's Gate Away Team.
When the victims' bodies are examined, the mass suicide takes a further bizarre twist.
Some of the men had been castrated.
They saw sexual urges as being contaminating. So some members of the group had themselves surgically castrated in order to, help eliminate those sexual urges.
And I think it's still hard for some people to understand is how a large group of people could be influenced to that point.
It's a question experts still ponder to this day. But while America may have considered the deaths as a tragic waste of life, the followers didn't even regard what they were doing as suicide.
They believed that all they were doing was engaging in a transmigration. They were leaving their earthly containers behind, and their true nature, their elevated Elohim nature, was going to that spaceship to join with the elders and return to their planet. So they saw this as an act of salvation.
It's the drive for salvation that is also motivating Church Universal and Triumphant in late 1980s Montana. Believers are building bunkers in an effort to survive a nuclear strike, and they've stockpiled weapons. Is America about to witness another Doomsday massacre? In late 1980s Montana, followers of Church Universal and Triumphant are building a shelter complex at a cost of $25 million.
Fully self-contained underground living for 750 people for 7 months. And beyond that, we had a large food storage building that had enough food for all of us to survive for 7 years.
Believers plan to ride out a predicted nuclear winter and emerge to repopulate America. But there's a snag.
Everybody in the organization took it as that the war is coming on October 2nd, 1989. And of course, they were not finished by that date. So another message came out that says, well, you've got till January, and then January, you've got till March.
Elizabeth Prophet settles on a revised Doomsday date of March 15th, 1990. On March 14th, as night falls, members make final preparations and head underground.
Well, it was a madhouse, really, because the shelters really were still not completely finished.
There was a palpable tension in the air the night that we went into the bomb shelters. We were all on high alert.
Though some devotees have been told this is a drill, to Elizabeth Clare Prophet's inner circle, the threat is very real.
My mother really believed that something was going to happen on that date, and so she was giving people signals that you really better be ready this time. It's not a drill.
They have invested so much in their leader's prediction that to question it now would be unthinkable.
There was not much dissension in the group at all. The group went into the shelters calmly, cleanly, no fights, no arguments, and with a great expectation that by the morning, the United States would have been destroyed by a nuclear attack.
750 people have given up everything for the chance to be saved. Deep below ground, they appeal to the ascended masters for protection.
There were a lot of decrees going on. Decreeing is a form of high-speed prayer. We thought even if we had done everything physically to prepare, we needed to be prepared spiritually.
While chanting, we would basically move the swords back and forth, what we believed as sort of clearing negative energy.
As night falls, the devotees brace themselves for a Soviet first strike.
At the time, I thought that was it. I thought we were going to be going into a new world.
I do recall when the lights were out and it was time for me to go to bed that I was just belted into my bunk, staring up at the ceiling in the darkness and waiting for the shock.
But it's a shock that never comes. In the morning, the world is as it was before.
The next morning came and it was just like the wind had been taken out of them.
How could we have done all of this and nothing have happened? Is anything ever going to happen? And was this all for nothing?
You squander your inheritance, sell your car, go deeply into debt, and it's all for nothing. And you realize that not only have you made a fool out of yourself, but you have ruined your family.
From this moment, Elizabeth Prophet's hold over her followers begins to weaken. Many ultimately leave the church, including her son Sean.
I felt a big sense of betrayal because this is something I'd given my life to. I trusted her. And all of a sudden, not only was it wrong, but it had been destructive to a community of everyone I'd ever known.
His sister, the once anointed successor to Elizabeth Prophet, also leaves the church.
I just think that we went way overboard, and it was because of our power structure, because all the power was invested in one person who was making bad decisions.
Elizabeth Clare Prophet continues to lead the church until 1999, when Alzheimer's forces her into retirement. She dies in 2009.
I don't really think too much about her because I consider that kind of a closed chapter in life, but certainly what she stood for, what she represented, was not something I agree with.
But the story of Church Universal and Triumphant does not end here. The church remains on Royal Teton Ranch, and so do its bunkers.
Today, people are going, wow, you guys built shelters, you were ahead of your time.
Royal Teton Ranch, Montana. Since the failed prophecy, Church Universal and Triumphant have kept a close eye on people who venture near their property, leading many to question, just what do they have to hide? Then in July 2012, the church attempts to end the speculation by allowing our cameras a rare chance to film on their property.
Mrs. Prophet was guided in the early 80s to come here and develop this beautiful land, and we consider this a spiritual piece of property, and we consider it sacred land.
Current church president Valerie McBride says the church doesn't deserve to be labeled a cult.
It's so interesting that people would think that we're a cult because, again, we have really become mainstream. We've been around for over 55 years. Despite the fact that we did have the shelters at that time, nobody got hurt. Everybody's still here. We had the shelters 15 years ago. We were around 35 years before that. It's 15 years later, and we're still here. Everybody's alive, things are good, and we're looking forward to a bright future.
As for Elizabeth Prophet's prediction, some current members claim it never happened.
Reason to expect and to be prepared for a Soviet first strike against the United States of America.
Mrs. Prophet never predicted that anything bad would happen. She just said, these shelters are here, should you need them. We built the shelters more or less as a spare tire or an insurance policy. It's a comfort that they're there, but I quite honestly, all of us hope that they never get used.
For Sean Prophet, the path from born believer to total atheist is complete.
I learned a lot of lessons growing up in this church, and the biggest lesson I learned was that religion is not a phenomenon that really adds to the human experience. The benefits are not worth the cost. Whatever you think you're getting from religion, you pay a heavy price.
From our perspective, it would be helpful if he would be able to just respect our wishes and just let things go. You know, the past was the past. We've moved on. It'd be really nice if he could too.
Sociologists who have studied the group in recent years believe they have moved on from their apocalyptic past and should be allowed to worship as they please.
In the actual act of the prophecy and trying to fulfill the prophecy, they didn't break any laws, and nobody was physically hurt or harmed in any way. They have, as far as I know, totally abandoned the apocalyptic scenario. The organization is continuing, and yes, they do deserve to be known as a legitimate religion.
Church Universal and Triumphant may have relegated their apocalyptic predictions to history, but across America, religious leaders continue to make prophecies. Christian preacher Harold Camping set 2 doomsday dates in 2011. And a Miami-based group called Growing Embrace International reportedly predicted an apocalypse for June 30th, 2012. Doomsday religions are also adapting to the digital age.
Most people are being recruited on the internet now. Very interestingly, on discussion boards, on websites.
One of cult expert Steve Hassan's concerns is a Korean religious group known for producing apocalyptic videos. They are currently recruiting in America.
There's a lot of very emotional scenes of death, destruction, natural calamities, basically making it sound like the only people on earth doing God's will is this particular group, and that if you don't do what they tell you, then you're gonna be killed.
Destructive cults have loomed large in America's history, and experts warn that in the 21st century, they are likely to rise again.
It is really possible that something like this could happen again. So, of course, it's ironic that Jim Jones at Jonestown had the famous quote, "Those who don't pay attention to history are destined to repeat it." Young people unaware that these events have happened may be, excessively naive about the way in which they could happen again.